And we're live. Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Yazzie, co host of Red Power Hour, here for a regular RPH recording with my co host, Elena Ortiz. You want to say hi, Elena? Uh, yeah, we were actually talking already, and then I was like, we should just press record because we're excited today. We're not necessarily talking about, current events in the world, although this book is rugged. It definitely portrays a world that I think we are both very familiar with. But what we're doing today in our episode is we're reviewing a book, which I think is the first time we're doing this on Red Power Hour. Sometimes we review movies and TV shows, but the book we're reviewing for the people watching on YouTube is this book. It's called Shutter by a Dene author named Ramona Emerson. I know Ramona. If you're interested in joining our Patreon, I'm going to try to get Ramona on and do an interview with her about this book. Shutter came out last year in the fall. Do you know when it actually came out?
I don't know. I think it came out in the fall, but it hasn't been that long.
Well, it made the long list for the National Book Award. So it's a highly acclaimed debut novel from Ramona Emerson. And yeah, if you're interested in hearing me talk to the author or Elena, please join our Patreon. We're going to try to do maybe a 30 to 45-minute interview with her about this book. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Are you looking it up, Elena?
Yeah.
When the book came out?
So let me see. I'm looking at the book. It just says 2022. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm.
So Ramona is actually, if you look at the book, the inside flap of the back of the book, Ramona's a pretty celebrated and decorated filmmaker. Mostly does documentaries, but an incredible filmmaker, actually. So I remember talking to her maybe like 2 years ago. I did an interview with her for a film she was making, and she was talking about this novel and was still trying to finish it up at the time. And so it's really wonderful to see it out in the world. Still trying to find it?
August 2nd, 2022.
Oh, okay.
And I just looked it up on Amazon, and it's actually an editor's pick best books of 2022 on Amazon, too.
So, whoa. Okay.
Yay.
This is, okay. That's interesting. So this book came out on August 2nd. Dark Winds came out in like June, the TV show that I loathed and let the world know on our RPH episode. Back in August or September. They cover somewhat similar topics, actually. They both center on a Navajo story, kind of narrate the landscape of the Navajo Nation, talk about kind of like Navajo spirituality and sometimes like the bad things, the taboo things that you're not supposed to talk about as a Navajo person. They're both about crime. They're both about solving mysteries. And I liked this one much better than Dark Winds, is what I'm trying to say. So it's interesting. This book came out 2 months after that TV show premiered. So this was all last summer. And that this has, I don't know if Dark Winds has really like received acclaim, critical acclaim, but this book definitely did. But I think there's some key differences between them. So I was just thinking a lot about like why I didn't like Dark Winds in the back of my mind while I was reading this book.
Yeah. And I thought about that too, because I have tortured myself and read Hillerman's, both Hillermans, both Tony and Anne Hillerman. And actually, I used to read them when I was far from home, or Tony Hillerman anyway, back in the late 80s, early 90s, just to feel that sense of home again. But the interesting thing is that like Hillerman's are it's all the white voice. It's the white gaze into Dene culture, and then where the few times where he actually does Pueblo, because he has a couple sacred clowns where he talks about Zuni and Hopi, but it's all just, it's so starkly white, like it's an observer describing what they see, but there's no depth, there's no substance, there's no understanding, there's just the white gaze. And this one was, and Shudder made me laugh out loud, and made me like, it was so evocative of the area around Tohatchee and also Albuquerque, but just the way she talks about the land and belonging to the land and being part of the land, and the way she talks about her grandmother's house and the coffee percolating. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, like, how many people reading this book have never seen the little bubble on the top of a coffee pot with the coffee percolating on the stove? Probably a whole bunch, because they didn't grow up either in that area or that generation that, well, for Native people, it's not a generation. That's just the way you make coffee. You put it on the stove and you let it percolate till it turns into mud, and then you just add a little more hot water. But it was so refreshing to me to read something that wasn't a white portrayal of Native culture, but a real Native voice and a strong female voice and a strong female character. And I think it's a really horrific, I mean, it's supposed to be, it's a horror novel, but what she sees and what she experiences is horrific, and it's supposed to be horrific. So I think she did a really good job. I am not Danae, so some of the parts of it which sort of were, flags that were flagging for me, I thought, I wonder how Danae people are going to think about this. From an outsider's perspective, I recognized where the flags were. I can't speak to how red the flags were.
Yeah, I'll get into that as a Danae person. But first, maybe, I didn't mean to start out the conversation comparing it to Hillerman, but that's actually really important, that is this the first book ever written kind of in that genre by like a Danae woman, and I think that's why it's such a landmark contribution to like Danae literary history, or the Danae literary tradition, just because Hillerman has taken up so much space for so many decades, and so this book is like a turning point, I think, in the genre. Right, because it's about like, what's that called? It's a crime, or like crime thriller, paranormal horror. I don't know. It's a combination of all of those things. And in a way, they think that Hillerman's books, because he was really obsessed with witchcraft all the time and things like that, as central to the stories he was telling about crime and murder on the reservation. And so, yeah, that maybe that's part of the reason why this book has been so well received, because it really is a turning point. In terms of, like how it's received by Danae people, I was just asking Elena if she had read any reviews, or if there were any like Navajo or Danae reviews of the book yet, and I don't think there have been at this time. I might be the first person. It's just because there's a lot of things that Ramona, maybe I'll just call her Emerson, that Emerson writes about in the book that, like, from a Danae perspective, you should never talk about those things. And then she even writes in the book about how the character she's involved with, there's a medicine person, there's her grandma, tell her repeatedly, you're not supposed to be doing this, you're not supposed to be doing this, you're not supposed to be talking about this. And she gets like prayers constantly. Her grandma's dragging her to the medicine man constantly to like protect her from it, and he's always counseling her to stay away from those things, because, they can interfere and they can cause harm to you and to your family, which is what you're told all the time as a Navajo kid growing up and then your entire adult life. So it's interesting that Emerson chooses to write about these things. And then in the course of writing about them, she's constantly like reminding herself and like the character that's narrating the book, named Rita, who's a young Navajo woman, who's this forensic photographer for the Albuquerque Police Department. Sorry, we didn't even describe the plot of the book, but is constantly telling herself and reminding her like that she's not supposed to be doing this, even as we're like following her through this really harrowing experience of murder and death and ghosts and evil, and it's multi-layered. All of the things you're not supposed to talk about, honestly. As a Navajo person, Emerson talks about those things in the book, but there's like a self-awareness through the narrator of Rita and then the Diné people that she loves, like the medicine man, Mr. Batsili, or her grandma. I'm constantly telling her not to do these things, and then she can't help it. It's not like she's doing them anyway. It's that she actually can't help it, that she sees dead people, you know? And so she's trying to figure out how to live a life where she sees dead people. And I have to be honest, like, I don't know if should we do spoilers in this conversation? Because we're probably going to talk about a few key passages from the book. Or should we try to talk in a circumspect way so we don't have spoilers?
I think we should just say if you haven't read the book, you will get more out of this podcast if you read the book and then listen to the podcast. So I highly recommend reading the book, and I think we can't not have spoilers.
Well, what was I saying? Good. No, I was saying, should we have spoilers? I was going to talk about something specific.
She can't help it because she can't help that she sees dead people.
Yeah, she can't help that she sees dead people. And so the book, right, follows Rita. Rita, like I said, is a young Navajo woman living in Albuquerque, is about 5 to 6 years into being a forensic photographer for the Albuquerque Police Department. She photographs lots of different things, but every scene that you go to with her, this happens particularly in the first, like, 70 to 100 pages of the book, you're just going to crime scene after crime scene, and Rita's walking you through every click of her camera, every shot that she has to take for evidence, right? As the APD proceeds through their investigations. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I had to put the book down because the book begins, the first third of the book is just this like very graphic, almost encyclopedic description of like what she encounters, the things that she sees. She's mostly photographing dead bodies, right? Oftentimes murder, sometimes accidents, and then the people, like, you know, who have passed in these crime scenes or these scenes that she's photographing come to her and they badger her, you know, to help them with things. Sometimes they don't even know that they've passed on. And so anyway, I started reading the book earlier this week and I had to put it down for a bit. And I almost didn't keep reading it, to be honest. For me, that was mostly just how intense the first part of the book is. Once you get over that hump, the story starts to unfold in, I think, a bit more of a formulaic kind of crime novel kind of way. But maybe it was just for me as like a Diné person. And the choice to do that up front, it just kind of like keeps punching you in the face over and over again. And that had to be an obvious choice, either on her part or her editor's part, to like put that in the front. And you kind of have to like get through that in order to get more involved in the story as it's unfolding. And I don't quite yet know how I feel about that, because I almost didn't make it through that part. Because the things she was saying and talking about were like, that's the kind of stuff you do not look at, you don't read about it, you don't think about it as a Diné person. And so anyway, I don't know how you felt about that.
It was super graphic. I mean, the accident that is really the key part of the plot, or no, it's not an accident. The scene that she goes to that becomes the key part of the plot is a woman that has either jumped or been thrown off of an overpass on I think it was I-40. And she's hit by multiple vehicles, so she's in bad shape and in lots of different pieces. And she, like Melanie said, she takes you through click by click, which I think is where the title comes from, Shutter. Like click by click what she's photographing. So I thought that drew me into the scene and almost took me along with her as she's seeing this. And my response to it was, how could Rita do this day after day after day? And as a Dene person, in particular, she does this with full awareness, self-awareness that she's not supposed to be doing this, that she's opening herself up to just bad juju. And then it does flip back and forth in time, to multiple different time periods in her life, when she was a child, when she was a teenager. Her mother left her with her grandmother, where she was raised in Tallahatchie. So you flip back to that, where she's in school, and as a 6-year-old, where she doesn't understand what it is that she's seeing, and she talks about it like a child will. This is what I saw. This is what I experienced, but nobody wants to hear it because the adults in her life understand that what she's seeing are ghosts or dead people. And then the kids get that from the parents. So that awareness, this, I don't even want to say gift, I'm trying to think of another word, that this difference that she has, this child has something about her is different, and immediately it's bad, and she's told not to do it. And then you skip ahead to her as an adult, and this is, she's chosen to not avoid it and not ignore it and not try to make it go away, but to like face it head on by being close to death every day of her life. And not only is she taking us through these crime scenes, but there's a point in the book where she also says she hasn't had a day off in like months. And she's working, 18, 20 hours.
She gets
so
no
not only is
sleep.
she
doesn't
no
eat.
sleep. And she's just immersed herself into this situation to the point where, her health, her physical and mental health are being impacted by it. So you almost feel that exhaustion and that sort of desperation, and that's, I think, the first part of the book got me into that right away. And then it kind of lightened up a little bit, and you start getting the stories of her childhood and of her grandmother, who she clearly adores, and Mr. Bitzilli, and then cousins of hers, and that come through, and other people in her life, that there is love and, family and community. You don't get that sense in Albuquerque. You just get darkness. And then she ties in more light.
Oh, you know what? That's such a beautiful way to put it, because the chapter structure is like one chapter will take place. So I think the present tense of Rita's life, where she's a forensic photographer, is taking place sometime in the early 2010, 2011, because there's a bar that she references that is on the rooftop of a hotel that opened in 2010 in Albuquerque. So, and then I think the flashbacks are to the 90s up until maybe the early 2000s is when she's like a teenager, like in junior high, and up to a teenager and then going to college at the University of New Mexico. So I think that those are the two time frames, because I was really thinking about it, just because I'm so familiar with the geography of Albuquerque. But the reason why I'm saying this is it's a very Dene thing to go back and forth between the dark and the light, And you're totally right, Elena. Each chapter, there's like the darkness of Albuquerque, and then there's the light of home. Even though the way she describes Tallahatchie, and like her cousin who passes at some point, she's telling the story of her cousin who passes when she's a teenager. They're like drinking at an abandoned house out somewhere, I think on, I'm not too familiar. I'm not from that part of the res, but Tallahatchie. but they're up on a bluff or like something like that, and it's like an abandoned housing area, and they're all partying. You know, teenagers go to party there, and something terrible happens, and her cousin passes, who she loves. She was a teenager at the time. But what I'm trying to say is that the way she describes even like the drought of the 90s on the res, like I think I'm younger than Emerson, probably by about a decade, but I was in high school in the 90s. And I just remember, I didn't grow up on the reservation, but I remember going to the res a lot. And the way that she would describe the landscape and even how people acted and what they did was very much like brought me right back to when I was a teenager or even when I was in middle school and we'd go out to the res. And so it was very like, even though it was a very honest portrayal of the difficulty of life on the reservation, it was always bright. Every time the chapter going back to like her teenage years with her grandma came up, it always got really bright in my mind. And then when the next chapter would switch back to what she was going through in Albuquerque, even the way she described it, it was always just so dark and like depressing and evil. And the thing is like Albuquerque, you know, there's stories about the cartel. There's stories about Indian rolling in the book. You know, there's like these horrific murder scenes. Even the way she described winter exposure death, she had to photograph a young Navajo man, you know, who had passed away from exposure under a bench in downtown Albuquerque. Just like the smoking and like just all of the description of the dark hallway of this, like, I know which apartment building, the building she's talking about that the main character lives in Albuquerque is just so depressing, you know? And you're right, that darkness and that lightness, you go back and forth between it. And that must be a very obvious narrative choice for her as a Dene person, because that's what it's all about. It's about the balance between the two. And Albuquerque is a really evil place. I can say Albuquerque's like oh man, Albuquerque's got some bad stuff in it. And she describes Albuquerque just so perfectly, the adjectives and the way that Rita moves through that city.
And the cops. I mean,
and the cops.
There are some, well, you know, ACAB, but they're the guy who's the cop who is the evil one, the villain in this book. I mean, I can just see, like, in my mind's eye, I see this guy, and he could have been like the guy who was sheriff of Bernalillo County, who refused to put cameras on his cops because he said it was too expensive, and his cops were always getting popped for beating people up. And you know, I mean, I can just see the cops as she describes them, because they're all bad. They're all, you know, just these evil sort of
disgusting.
Out for themselves, cheaters, liars, embezzlers, and there's just not one of them that's good. Even at one point, she travels up, I think she goes to Penasco to find the former partner of the really bad cop, and he turns out to be, you know, probably a decent character, but he still left. He still ran away. He still was not accountable to either himself or, you know, what he had done to people in Albuquerque. And so Albuquerque is like, yeah, literally the evil place, like the Dark Tower or Mordor. I thought Santa Fe was Mordor, but anyway.
They're both Mordor. They're both Spanish colonial settlements. Yeah. Like, there's some evil
in
both places. And like,
you were right. I mean, when she talks about Tehachapi, and, you know, there has been a lot of changes. So Tehachapi there's a straight shot north between Gallup, goes all the way up to Shiprock, and along that road, which ironically they used to call the Devil's Highway, it used to be 666. Mm-hmm. And it's a terrible road because people would go to Gallup for the alcohol, to buy alcohol. And there was a lot of death and destruction on that road. And they, they'll never change what Gallup is, the border town violence and the violence that is Gallup. But they did change the name of that road, so it's not the Devil's Highway anymore.
It's not 666.
It's not 666. I mean, that's settler logic, right? Settler mentality. But also along that road are a lot of communities, old communities. The New Mexico part of the res, and it's a beautiful area. I mean, you start getting up into the Red Mesas and the Red Rocks, and it's just a beautiful part of the res. And even when she's talking about it being in drought, and we've been in drought for years, it's still a peaceful place. It's still a calm place. And even with her cousin who, is partying and then gets killed, you still see this sense of community. Like when her grandmother's neighbor passes and the kids and grandkids all come and they're all fighting over her belongings. And yet there's a resolution there, and there's a sense that arguing and all of that animosity went away, that it was resolved, and that the community came back together and the family came back together, and that they would take care of each other. Like, you get that sense in Tohatchee at home, but in Albuquerque, you just get this sense of chaos and darkness and evil, and you never know who the evil is and what the evil is. I mean, the dead person is evil, even though they're just wanting some resolution to the end of their life. Irma is the ghost. She's still evil.
Yeah, one of the main characters in the book is a ghost. It's the woman whose body that Rita's photographing in the very first scenes of the first chapters of the book, who's thrown from an overpass onto I-40. And she wants Rita to figure out, like, who killed her, and she wants justice. She's a really intense character. Irma the ghost.
Irma the ghost. And Irma literally opens like the gates of hell and says, if you don't help me, I'm going to let these other ghosts come and torment you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Whew. What does Rita say in some of the first pages of the book, where she's like describing, you just follow her from scene to scene, and you find out that most of the scenes are connected to a cartel. Turns out that the cartel has murdered Irma, right? Yeah, Irma. And the main investigator, Garcia, is involved with the cartel. So he's complicit and involved in all of these murders that are happening on the exact same day that she has to go and photograph. And then she, uncovers the mystery, right? She pieces it together and figures it out by the end at grave danger to herself. And in the first pages of the book, Rita says that on the job, she's discovered how evil people are. If the phrase is actually like, this is the one I realized people are evil. And so what's interesting about that statement in relation to what you were just saying is that from like a Dene perspective, any interaction with any ghost, or like, even if you don't handle death in a very specific way, that's considered evil, period. Because if it touches you, or if you touch it, or if you interact with it, it can really affect you in a negative way. And so even all of that, and then you hear like her grandma and the medicine man, Mr. Bitsilli, they're telling her, they're using this language that this is evil, And for Rita, she's like, actually, people are evil. She's like, the living are evil. And even the ghost who's tormenting her, Irma, was involved in the drug trade, and probably did some really bad things. And so it's interesting. It's like, right, from a Dene perspective, anything that is in that other realm is considered evil, right? And you're supposed to stay away from it. But here, like what's causing all of this, it's not it's not the other side that's causing this. It's people doing really terrible things and then dying, and then even in the from the other side, um really still just being shit asses, honestly. And still being like very attached to the evil things that they did in life. So it's like a, I don't know. I don't know exactly what I'm saying. It's just like it's an interesting moment where she was like, actually people are evil. And Albuquerque is definitely like an evil place in sort of in terms of like, yeah, like, you know, you want to put your ash on before you step out the door. You got to protect yourself from the vibes, the heebie-jeebies of Albuquerque, because boy, that place is so violent, has lots of layers ever since it was first colonized and settled by the Spanish, and they did all evil genocide-y things to Pueblo people there. But it also the living people in Albuquerque. There's a lot of it's a really crazy place. It's a dark place.
Yeah, it's a crossroads of a lot of really evil things. Like there's a lot of Pueblo people that wander into Albuquerque. There's a lot of Dene people that wander in from various parts of the res. You know, it's a big city. People are looking for opportunities. They may have come for jobs and then they've lost the jobs. And there's no pity. I mean, Albuquerque has no pity on people. There's very little social services for anybody, but particularly if you're native. And that's why there's a lot of people, you know, unsheltered people on the streets. And most of them are people of color. And you just, it just is a bad place. And then the other side of that is, you know, it is this major university. It's the largest university in New Mexico. And so you have all of these students who come from all over the state and out of state, who are, you know, working towards getting degrees, right sort of in the center of where this novel is based. I mean, the university is always sort of referenced. She goes to the frontier, which is right, you know, it's a big university place. She talks about a lot of things in reference to the university. And then you have these incredibly wealthy people in Albuquerque. I don't know if they still call it the Northeast Whites, but that's what we used to call it. The Northeast Heights, which is where all the wealthy people live. And that's where the judge lives, whose crime scene she has to go to. And they talk about, you know, she talks about the house and how it's different from, you know, she does talk a lot about that house, and you see a juxtaposition to her grandmother's house in Tehachapi, and then this judge's house up in the Northeast Heights with views to the mountains and all of that, and how that is just full of violence and full of pain and sadness, and a lot of the scenes in Albuquerque, it sort of runs the gamut from just her little corner of the world in that apartment building with her neighbor who sounds like she's a curandera, because she's got all those saints and things, and she has an altar. So that seems to be sort of a safe place for her. But then everywhere else she goes out into the community, there's all of this evil and sadness and anger and violence. And even when she's talking about Tehachapi and her cousin's death, and when the neighbor lady passes, like you don't get that sense of evil there that you do in Albuquerque.
And she even says, like, she's like, I never wanted to bring this to my grandma's. That's the one place where this wasn't allowed, you know? And she says this more than once in terms of like the stark difference between Tehachapi and Albuquerque. It's interesting now that I think of it. Does the book take place in the span of like a few days,
Yeah.
right? Maybe a week or less is like the entire book. It happens really quickly. Um, the pace of how things unfold in Albuquerque around the story, the murder she's trying to solve. Well, she's forced to solve it by this ghost that's tormenting and terrorizing her, Irma. Um, and it has this feeling of like I think what was also really hard for me at the beginning of the book was the just the how fast paced it was. Like you said, like she doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep, she works around the clock. She's just like taking you through every shot of a dead body that she's taking, and it's just like bam, 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 and there's just it's nonstop. It is like an onslaught of violence and death, and she gets no reprieve. And so then the whole book takes place in the matter of maybe a handful of days, and she gets no reprieve because then she tries to go home and sleep, and then this like ghost, the spirit is there literally screaming in her face nonstop and terrorizing her. And then when she starts to figure out what's happening, then the police, the crooked cops who are, in with the cartel are trying to find her to kidnap her. They like destroy her entire apartment. Like she gets no rest ever, awake or asleep, when she's in Albuquerque. And it's very like, I don't know. It was hard. It was really hard to read, or to like have that feeling of like never being given a chance for peace. And it's possible that's how like Rita living her life, like living this kind of life is almost a metaphor for like how the city is or how Albuquerque is. It's like a lightning rod, I guess, in a way, for like what the border town really feels like for
Exactly.
Native
That's
people.
what I was thinking too.
Do you get what I'm
Yep.
saying? It's almost like Rita's movement through the space is the description of the space itself, and that's what kind of felt PTSD to me or something. You get what I'm saying? It's like I was inside that character, and it was really uncomfortable. Because I know those things to be true, but it was also like it was a lot. It was hard because I know it's very honest. All of the things she describes in this book happen. I know this because I've experienced a lot of these things.
Well, that's exactly. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking too. Like Rita herself is every Indigenous person who's come off the res and gone to school in Albuquerque. She describes her early years in Albuquerque so each chapter is named after a camera. And so these are the lenses through which she sees her life progressing. And she gets to UNM and she's taking, she's in photography. She's doing photography and she's taking pictures. When she is done with that, she is launched right into the working world where she's confronted with death and violence. And it feels to me like every other Indigenous student who's going through UNM or going through a university program, getting out and, trying to find their way in a world which doesn't accept them, which doesn't want them, and is constantly throwing violence at them. It could really be anyone. And the only place that she feels safe is back on the res, is back home. And it's really, just a metaphor for what Native people go through, even if you're not in school, what they go through coming from the res and going into a big city.
That's really interesting that you say that, because that brings out something I hadn't really thought much about with the book, but there's so many instances of racism that she experiences like constantly. And I think what people now term microaggressions from the male cops that she has to work with. Like she can't tell people that she sees things. Well, she can't tell Navajo people even that she sees things, because then they'll be like, you're a witch, and she actually gets called that on more than one occasion by other Diné people. But out in the world, like in the Albuquerque, when we're going through scenes with Rita in Albuquerque, she can't be herself ever. ever as a Dene woman, as a photographer. Because people are like, who's this Navajo woman who's a photographer? Like, go, why aren't you like a waitress? You know, restaurant. You get what I'm saying? Like, she's very out of place. And she comes from, she's a third generation Dene woman photographer. Her grandmother learned how to do photography in boarding school, you know, and then her mom was a photographer and she's a photographer. And so it's this like, it's just a really, it's interesting to follow this Dene woman in this time period, navigating the world where she's very much at home in Tehachapi, like at her grandma's, but she doesn't quite fit in anywhere. And she's trying to like navigate the world, like you said, like each chapter is a different camera. She's trying to navigate the world through like the lens. And it's just like an interesting journey to follow her on. It makes me wonder if there's going to be like follow-up books, if this is going to be like a series where Rita, we're going to get to see Rita continue to do various things. There's like, she gets like this moment with this guy. She has a one night stand with this guy. And I'm like, I want to pick that back up because it actually seemed like a really nice, like that's a moment of warmth for Rita. That's like a reprieve from this craziness that's always going on in her life. And I just want her to have more of that. But yeah, it's like you're following the journey of a Dene woman who doesn't quite fit in anywhere, but has a very authentic indigenous life. You know, an interesting, strange path in life, but nevertheless, like something that feels very real and very grounded. And that's what I really liked about the book.
She's very self-aware. Like she knows from her childhood experience and being bullied and being told by adults, you know, that this part of her is wrong and she should try to suppress it or stifle it. And yet she has this incredibly strong female presence in her life from her grandmother and also her mother, who she does go to live with. And when she talks about the photographs outside of the crime scene photographs, they're all of these people in her life that, you know, she describes the photographs she took of her grandmother and her grandmother and her mother and her mother and herself. So you get this very strong matriarchal vibe through the whole thing that's kept her going and that's allowed her to be who she is, even when she knows, she's fully cognizant she shouldn't be that way. She shouldn't be doing what she's doing. She's very aware of it. And she even at some point says, you know, my grandmother keeps bringing Mr. Bitsili into this, and I wish they would just stay away. Like you said, I don't want my grandmother to be involved in this. But her grandmother, of course, is so worried about her. And so, you know, she gets Mr. Bitsili in the pickup truck, and I can see the pickup truck driving along I-40 from Gallup to Tohatchee. And I'm just thinking, yeah, I mean, I can see this. To me, this is like visible. I could see it. And you almost, you know, I really liked Rita because I felt like I knew where her struggles were coming from, and that you just want to see her find more light.
Yeah.
And to be happy. And so that one night stand with the guy, and they go, I don't know what restaurant she was describing, but she goes to lunch with this guy. And she said, this is a place I would never go because it's full of white people who look at me like, why am I there? Like I don't belong. And I'm thinking, oh, that could be a half a dozen places, you know.
It's this Parisian cafe. I think that's at the corner of either 2nd and 3rd and Gold. I never once went there, and I always drive by and be like, who eats at that place? That place is ridiculous. Like, it's Albuquerque. Like, no one eats at that place, but it's probably like the white businessmen who work in downtown Albuquerque.
Yep. And she talks about Earls and Gallup, and there's a really sweet scene where she takes her grandmother to lunch at Earls and Gallup, and the Navajo and Pueblo people who go into Earls to sell arts and crafts, and her grandmother wanted to buy the earrings, not necessarily because she wanted them, but because she wanted the woman to have money. She knew the artisan needed the money, so she wanted to give it to her. And there are scenes like that that are interspersed through all of this sort of insanity and chaos that just, I mean, we can all relate to. I mean, those of us who grew up here, and like I just felt that sensitivity and that understanding of the culture, which is beautiful. However, it's framed. I would like to see more of Rita. I'd like to see her branch out and maybe not be so centered in Albuquerque, but we had to talk to Emerson about that.
Or just so trapped. Just so trapped because, like I said, the whole novel unfolds in the matter of a few days, and she's just completely immersed in this hell, the hell of her life. And I don't think she's that old. She's been working for APD as a forensic photographer for 6 years, and that was the job she could get out of college. So she's not even 30, I think, in the book. I'm like, girl, you need to branch out and go, you need to take a step back from this. Like, I believe in Rita. I feel like I identified, and I want, like you said, I want her to find more light in her life. Something I was going to say also, that our earlier comments about kind of comparing this with Hillerman, there's no witchcraft in this book whatsoever. And there isn't even like the weird obsession that white historians and anthropologists have with Diné culture, like the creation story, and like they're always having to do this like weird requisite thing at the beginning of all the books that they've written about Navajo people, where they're like, well, and in the creation story they said this, and Navajo people believe in beauty. These things, as like somehow that's the stand-in for describing like our agency or our motivation, or like how we view the world as Diné people. And Hillerman definitely does this, and Dark Winds definitely did this. Actually, I think the overuse of witchcraft in Dark Winds really, if I remember correctly, that's one of the things that really bothered me. And this book is talking about death. It's talking about the things you're not supposed to talk about as a Diné person, but it doesn't once go into the realm of that. It doesn't exploit that for anybody who might be reading or like consuming the book itself. And it also doesn't do the culture thing. It doesn't moralize about like what it means to be a Diné person from like a particular cultural perspective. Even whilst Rita, especially the chapters where she's out in Tohatchi with her grandma and Mr. Batsili, that stuff, like all of those stories, I'm like, yes, this is exactly how it is. Yes, these are the conversations. This is how people talk to each other. This is what happens when you go to these kinds of events, and this is the kind of things that happen when you're out on the land. Like, yes, it was super authentic, I guess is what I'm saying. In a way that Dark Winds doesn't feel at all. It feels very performative, actually. And this book wasn't performative. And it also didn't do the witchcraft thing, which even though it was talking about, the kind of material that from a Diné perspective might go into that realm. And so I thought that was really, I think it was an obvious choice by Emerson not to go there, even while she's still talking about these things. And that's like that's a fine-edged sword or whatever to walk, right? That's a fine line to walk to be able to do that. And I'm sure there are Diné people who will feel differently about whether or not she should have written about these things or whether or not she did it successfully. But I think if we think about it in terms of its like contrast to like how Hillerman talks about very similar things, there's something about this that is very authentic and very realistic, but not exploitative. It doesn't go to that place. And that's something I end up trusting. Like I end up trusting Emerson as a writer and as a voice talking about these things. I guess that's what I mean, in a way that I've never trusted Hillerman.
Yeah, I mean, Hillerman is just and I'm going to say Hillerman as in both Tony and Anne, who's taken up the mantle of that series. It's very performative. It's very voyeuristic.
That's the word I was looking for, voyeuristic.
It's very shallow. And it's like, when white anthropologists look at Dene culture, they see superstition. They don't see religion. And so superstition, and I hate the word religion anyway, but they see things that can be exploited and glamorized, or whatever you want to talk about, skinwalkers and Navajo witches and this and that. And they don't see it as sacred. They see it as superstition or as scary stories told in the dark. So it's fine to exploit those things as a white writer and make a living off of characters that are so obsessed to the point of, nothing else in their lives other than chasing down skinwalkers. And that's what Hillerman has done with that whole Jim Chi series. And it's really disgusting, and it's really unfortunate, and it's really I don't even know what the word is. I mean, it's cartoons.
Yeah.
And it's not reality. And what Emerson has done is made, I think, a definite conscious choice to not go down that path. And the other word you used is authentic, like absolutely. I mean, why is it that you can read novel after novel from other famous American mystery novelists, and never once is their religion mentioned? Never once do you talk about, Sam Spade was a devout Catholic, and because of that, he has to go to communion every Sunday. I mean, you don't ever, that's not part of that genre. And yet Hillermans have made a living off of exploiting things that are not really part of everyday life. And I like the fact that, Emerson is deep into one of the biggest taboos, and yet it's treated in a realistic, sympathetic, I know I shouldn't be talking about this, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but this is it, and this is what Rita's life is.
Word. even like stylistically, the way that the TV show Dark Winds is made feels cartoonish. It's like a very it's a very Chris Airy kind of approach to telling those stories, and that is not this book at all, actually.
Everything in Hillerman is about witchcraft and about the dark side of Dene life ways, for want of a better word. And there wouldn't be a series if there wasn't that to exploit and that to sort of elevate to this, magic state. But you will be glad to know that the third season of Dark Winds has already wrapped. So we will have something else to maybe not. Maybe we can't watch it.
Yeah, I mean, that show and Hillerman as a person trying to tell stories about Navajo people objectifies Dene people and objectifies Dene, identity, I guess. I don't even know if it's culture. I find culture to be a very problematic word. It's just how Dene people live in the world, and how we view the world. And Shudder doesn't objectify at all. It actually brings you into this very, very complicated internal landscape of this Dene woman. And it doesn't answer a lot of things, and it doesn't pull any punches with the culture stuff or the witchcraft stuff or the things that Hillerman does. And even though again, I found it really difficult sometimes to get through some of the material that would be considered very taboo for a Dene person to talk about, or even to be reading about those things. I was like, I was like, I need to go pray. That's actually how I felt. I was like, wow, whoa.
Need to smudge the book.
I was like, oh, I need to put some ash on. And I did, actually. About 10 or 15 pages in, I was like, oh shit, I didn't know it was going to be like this. So I did do that. And so I understand, like, the tabooness of it. Even then, it was still something, right, that I stuck with because I believed in it, because it felt authentic and it was not an objectification. And I think that's why the book is kind of a big deal. Yep. Yeah,
and just as someone who spent a lot of time on the Navajo Res when I was growing up, and my dad taught summer sessions in Ganado and Saley, and we would go, and when I was a kid, and then I was a little older, just have spent a lot of time on the Res. So and my husband is Dene. Just the descriptions and the dialogue between her and her grandmother, Rita and her grandmother, and Rita and her grandmother and Mr. Bitsily were just like, it was like putting on a nice warm coat and sitting in front of the fire. It was just, and Melanie and I were talking earlier, like, there's a scene where they're talking about Arthur Yazzie, which is a Navajo phrase, which I honestly thought my husband's family made up. I'd never heard it before. It's a way of referring to arthritis. All right. And so I'm reading this and I was like, what? You mean you guys didn't make that up? I thought that was just you. And here it is written. Okay. And it's just so funny. And then, I'm talking to my husband about this, and he tells me that one of the jokes about, why arthritis is Arthur Yazzie, and he was telling me this in Navajo, and I was like hysterical because it sounded so much funnier in Navajo than in English because of the way the words rhyme. But I don't speak Navajo, but I still thought it was hysterical. That was just so, it was just so, like, I don't know that people without a tie to to Navajo people who have not been around Navajo people will get all of the things that were referred to. But I loved those little vignettes that were in there. They just made my heart so happy.
Yeah, and it's only like 2 or 3 lines in passing when she's talking about her grandma's arthritis, and she brings up like the Arthur Yazzie comment. I died. I read that this morning. I was finishing the book up this morning to prep for this, and there's a lot in the book that isn't funny, like, at all. It's very serious. It's really dark. There's a lot of darkness in the book, and that moment, I was just like, these are the Easter eggs that I love, Mm-hmm. It brought me back to like my dad, like how my dad talks. I'm assuming my dad is kind of from the same generation as her grandma, like that boarding school generation. But yeah, no, that Arthur Yazzie moment. I mean, again, just like if you didn't grow up that way, you just wouldn't know exactly why that was so damn funny. It was just right. It was on the nose. It was so on the nose. And so it's like, it was just so funny to see that very poignant moment of levity in a book that was really heavy, like, and insistently dark. And I was like, this is gold right here. This is gold.
Yep.
It's like the beacon for the Navajo reader. Or the Pueblo reader married.
Married to a Navajo. Yep. Yeah, I had to take the book out into the living room because I was reading it, and I was like, damn. And I took it out there and I was reading it to my husband and daughter, and I was like, yeah, I thought you guys made this up about Arthur Yazzie. And Delvin's like, no, there's a big joke about it. And then he proceeded to tell me all these jokes in Navajo, which probably were funny.
Now I'm trying to find the passage. I mean, I don't need to, but it's really good. It's just so good. Yeah.
It is there, and there are Easter eggs like that. You know, like the scene at Earl's and the going to the train in Gallup to catch the train to Albuquerque, and just, you know, the very evocative prose. And you can see, you know, like if you've ever been to Gallup, you know where the train station is because it's right along Old Route 66. And then I think at one point she talks about the pawn shops, and you know, you just feel that energy when she's referring to these things, and the sadness when she's leaving to go get on the train to go to Albuquerque and leaving her grandmother. Yeah, it's amazing.
And like the coffee that is a part of every exchange, you know, like when you're sitting down to have a conversation, the coffee's always there. Like you described, the percolator, that's a particular generation. It might still happen on like elder houses out on the res, but there's like a particular generation that had those percolators. And I remember those really well also from that period of time.
Blue enamel coffee pots with the little percolator on the top, and you put them on the wood stove.
Yeah.
And like my great grandmother, my Satya, it was on all day. And at the end of the day, like after dinner, you wanted a cup of coffee, you just added more water to it because by that time it was sludge. That was the way it was.
Yep. Well, I would recommend that folks read this book. I feel like maybe I've tried to be honest about like some of the beginning portions that were really difficult for me to get through as a Dene reader, but I would really like for other Dene people to read this book and to just share their thoughts, like maybe in light of maybe what Elena and I have talked about here. I think it's an important book for a lot of reasons, and it's a book that's going to spark conversation and probably debate amongst Dene people in terms of the topic and the things that she talks about very openly in the book. But the way she talks about those things that is so different than the way it's been spoken about by white authors is the reason why the book is really important. And kind of like brave. I was reading the book and I was like, whoa, this is a brave woman writing this book and telling this story. Also, because Emerson did this work for the APD for a very long time. And there were moments where I was like, if she experienced even half of the things that she's talking about in this book, then holy crap. Like, this is one strong Dene woman to have made it through, to have seen these things, and to be, I don't know, to be willing to write about it and to still be such like a powerful voice for our people and to be such a strong woman. Like, that was the other thing that came to mind. If any of that was autobiographical, and I guess I'm going to ask Ramona, you know, when I get the chance to talk to her about the book, if any of it is autobiographical, then wow. You go, girl. That's hardcore. You have lived a hardcore life.
And we need to, you know, I'm not going to speak to the Dene piece and the taboos. That's not my place. But just to see a strong Indigenous woman coming out and writing a book like this and sort of taking back the narrative that has been so abused by the Hillermans and making it her own and then sharing it with us. Like, I would like to see more women, Indigenous women writers. I'd like to see more Indigenous women writers, period. But doing this kind of book, which, you know, it's kind of mainstream, like mystery horror is kind of mainstream, but it's also been mostly the purview of men. And like, Dave, more power to you, Ramona Emerson.
Heck yeah. This book will punch you in the face for more reasons than one. And it's like, yeah, talk about coming out with the bang, to change things up for all of these reasons. So yeah. I don't know. We haven't rated anything according to the amount of sheep that it is. How many out of 10 sheep? How would you rate this book, Elena, in closing?
I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 sheep.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 sheep. It did also get a little too fast in the end. I think it's a long book. It's 290. It's almost 300 pages long. I didn't realize it was so long. You're immersed in what she's doing because of the pace and the clip of the writing.
Yeah, it went fast.
But I feel like the very end could have maybe like slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a little bit of warning for the Navajo reader about what you're about to get yourself into. I don't know. Are you allowed to do that, to give like a little like what's the word? Like a disclaimer, like the first page is like just letting you know. You could even put it in Navajo if you wanted to, like, or whatever. Like maybe that.
Yep.
that would have been helpful too. But obviously this book isn't just for Navajo readers. The entire world can read this book.
The entire world is. I really hope the entire world is reading it. I hope that this is the future of mystery horror novels, and that it's not Hillerman.
Heck yeah. Yeah, seriously, it's the beginning of a new era. Go Ramona.
Yeah.
Okay, 9 out of 10 sheep. I hope everyone buys this. I'm going to get my book signed by Ramona Emerson the next time I see her. Cool. Well, again, consider joining Patreon. I'm going to try to get Ramona Emerson on RPH, but behind the paywall, to have an interview with her and to discuss maybe some of the things Elena and I have talked about or questions we have about the book. So please consider. You can subscribe for $2. $2 a month is the lowest level, or higher if you had the money. That'd be great. But thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks talking about something else. Not sure what, but we'll be talking about something else. Have a good weekend.
Bye.